Breaking news today.
Please subscribe and then check notification box to get all breaking news alert.
Muslim refugee brutally rapes disabled girl, gets to stay when liberal judge hears 3 words. When a refugee encountered a mentally disabled girl, he overpowered his helpless victim and subjected her to unspeakable sexual assault before leaving her to freeze to death on the road. However, the sadistic rapist was spared deportation and will return to living off the taxpayers, all because the judge heard 3 disturbing words. With the refugee crisis providing a veil for never-ending migration, once welcoming Europeans are now watching as their justice system caters to the most depraved criminal migrants, turning their democracies into havens for brutality. Making up just a small percentage of the overall population, Muslims have already fundamentally transformed European justice systems into Sharia-accommodating courts that favor Islamic migrants. While many accused invoke cultural differences to excuse their crimes, liberals judges are now accepting just about any absurd reasoning to allow these migrant offenders to escape deserved extradition. As an Afghan asylum seeker and refugee child companion were brought to trial for the grisly sexual assault of a mentally disturbed teenager, the Swedish court heard how the Muslim pair subjected the disabled girl into vaginal, oral, and anal rape for 2 hours on a highway in Arlöv on January 13. Outrageously, the self-proclaimed refugee child escaped prosecution entirely by simply claiming that he was under 15 years of age when the gang rape occurred. Unfortunately for the 18-year-old Afghan, he received a sentence of deportation from Sweden after completing 10 months in a late youth care center in June, until he came up with an even more ridiculous excuse than his younger accomplice. Frietider reports that the Court of Appeal over Skane recently overturned the Malmö District Court's previous ruling to deport the failed Afghan asylum seeker after one of the liberal judges on their panel suggested that he has bad feelings about raping the high school girl for 2 hours. According to the Court of Appeals, one must take into account that the rapist is a young person who has recently reached the age of 18 years, has previously been unpunished, has bad feelings, with 3 suicide attempts in Sweden, and the security situation in Afghanistan is serious. In view of these circumstances, the Court of Appeals adheres to the opposite meaning of the verdict of the district court. Thus, the penalty of expulsion must be rejected, the court writes. The judge alleged that because the Afghan has showcased symptoms of depression since the heinous attack, he should not be returned to his homeland, despite losing his refugee status in March 2016, Sweden's News Today reports. Chief Counselor Monica Felding lauded the appeals court's decision to allow the rapist to stay in Sweden, blaming the illegal migrant's alleged hard life in Afghanistan for his penchant for raping disabled girls. He previously had never been convicted. The investigation in the staff section shows that his mental state is bad with anxiety and depression. He has had contact with the child and adolescent psychiatric clinic in Lund because of the trauma caused by his upbringing in Afghanistan. According to the social administration's opinion, he stated that he had carried out 3 suicide attempts during his time in Sweden, she argues in a different opinion. These liberal Islamo sympathizers have disturbingly expressed support for the rapists simply because of their migrant status but refused to offer the slightest concern for their innocent victim. Not only will the girl never see justice served, but she will see her abusers walking the streets in a matter of months. Both the judges and Felding gushed over the migrant rapist's alleged mental state, explaining that he has suffered trauma and psychological damage over the crimes he committed. Of course, not one official expressed this same concern for the mentally disabled girl, despite the fact that she is the only innocent victim in the case. Although leftists often whine about the alleged trauma that these Muslim migrant men have suffered under in their home countries, they refuse to acknowledge that these asylum seekers were often the perpetrators of the violence and oppression that plagues their Sharia regimes. Sharia law and governances were established not because a tiny minority of extremists invaded the lands and forcibly implemented such legislature against the will of the people but because the people themselves demanded it. As the Muslim populations grew in these previously non-Muslim nations, so did the barbarity that comes with Islamic law. The reason why sexual assault often goes unpunished in Muslim countries is that the Quran encourages men to abuse women who reject misogynistic and oppressive Islamic compulsions. Quran, O Prophet, tell your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to bring down over themselves, part, of their outer garments. That is more suitable that they will be known and not be abused. And ever is Allah forgiving and merciful. Should women disobey men, they are responsible for any abuse that befalls them and they are to blame for enticing men with their sinful bodies. Of course, the Prophet Muhammad modeled the proper abuse of women both physically and sexually, encouraging his followers to do the same. Quran 4:34, Men are in charge of women by right of what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend, for maintenance, from their wealth. So righteous women are devoutly obedient, guarding in the husband's absence what Allah would have them guard. But those wives, from whom you fear arrogance, advise them. Then if they persist, forsake them in bed, and strike them. But if they obey you, once more, seek no means against them. Indeed, Allah is ever exalted and grand. O Allah's Apostle! We get female captives as our share of booty, and we are interested in their prices. What is your opinion about coitus interruptus, withdrawing the male sexual organ before emission of semen to avoid conception? The Prophet said, Do you really do that? It is better for you not to do it. No soul that which Allah has destined to exist, but will surely come into existence. We are importing millions of men who adhere to an ideology that commands the physical and sexual abuse of women and children, including taking non-Muslims as sex slaves. Although we should not expect them to abandon their religious beliefs once they've arrived at our shores, we have the moral responsibility to oppose these beliefs with every fiber of our being.